right, friends, thank you for joining us again today for another edition of our series we have been doing on the occult this month. We've had our good friend Marcia Montenegro from Christian Answers for the New Age on, and today will be episode 3 of our series, in a month-long series that we're going to be doing. So Marcia is doing 3 out of the 4 shows we actually have planned. So today is the 3rd show. Next week we will have my good friend Shandon Guthrie on, and he actually did his PhD in demonology, and so we will be talking about that topic. He is a philosopher in Las Vegas and teaches at one of the colleges out there, so join us for that next week. Marcia, good to have you with us.
It's good to be back, Devin. Thank you.
Yeah. Tell the people, for those who are watching, maybe haven't seen the first 2 episodes, what did we cover in episode 1 and episode 2? And then what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we did Wicca in the first episode, and I didn't quite finish up with that. So we continued that in the 2nd episode. And I talked about the occult and what the occult is. I gave examples of it. And so that episode was quite thorough, I think. And today it's going to be psychics and channeling, which will include different forms of channeling and what that means and how that relates to psychics.
I've actually been very surprised by the response on YouTube.
Oh.
Both videos are well over 300 views.
Good. Oh, good.
Yeah, so I'm really excited to get into today's topic. We've got some people joining us now, so I appreciate everybody joining us. If you guys have any questions for Marcia, feel free. I'm sure, Marcia, you don't mind if they put it in the chat. Is that right?
No, that's fine. I don't know if I can see it, but just let me know.
Okay.
If you see the questions, tell me what they are.
Okay, I will do that. So yes, if anybody out there has any questions, feel free to type them in and we'll get them to Marcia. Or today we're only going to be able to go for an hour. And so maybe if you guys have questions, just feel free, and you guys we want you to be able to interact with Marcia as well. So let's see. So psychics and channeling. So is that it? That's the topic, right? Psychics and channeling. So
it's a big topic.
yeah, that is a very big. So I won't waste any more of the time. I'm going to kind of turn it over to you and let you just share how you want to share.
All right. Thank you, Devin. So psychics is, of course, a big topic. And what is a psychic? I would describe a psychic as someone who is getting information beyond the 5 senses. So they are not getting information through a natural means, which would be one of the 5 senses. And so the psychic can do it in different ways. And there's also some areas here I'm going to mention that kind of overlap that you might not think of as a psychic activity, but it really does relate because of the getting information supernaturally. Many psychics believe that they are getting in touch with something called the Akashic Records. This was something that came up with Edgar Casey, who was a man who, there's quite he's a very interesting figure. I don't know if some people have heard of him, some haven't. So Edgar Casey went into trances and when he was unconscious, basically, and would give information. He was called the sleeping prophet. And there's a whole institution and organization based on Edgar Casey in Virginia Beach. I've been there. It's called the Association for Research and Enlightenment, or the ARE for short. And I actually went there when I was in the New Age and took a tour and bought a book on meditation for children. to try to get my son to meditate. Fortunately, he was not interested. And he was only like 5 years old. Anyway, so Edgar Casey, he really fits into this topic because he is what you would call a psychic. He was a psychic and he was channeling, he was allowing information to come through him. That's not every psychic does that. But I'm gonna explain the different forms, but I just want to bring him up because he had a background in, I think, the Church of Christ, and was actually a Sunday school teacher. And for some reason, because of that, and because he would talk about God and Jesus, there was this persistent, lingering false idea that he was a Christian. Wow. And when I first started speaking in churches, I was very surprised that a lot of Christians would ask me what I thought of Edgar Casey and if I thought he was a Christian. Or didn't I know he was a Christian? So it was a real eye-opening experience for me because I knew about him, and I knew what he did, and I knew for sure he wasn't a Christian. And I actually there's Edgar Casey has followers all over, and they meet like once a week or whenever, maybe once a month in homes, and have little sessions together, and then have a speaker. I actually was a speaker at one of those events on astrology when I was a professional astrologer. And I also, just to let you know, on my website, Christian Answers for the New Age, I have an article on Edgar Casey, and I have an article on psychics. So just so people know that is there, christiananswersforthenewage.org. So Edgar Casey, I think because he became very popular. Now, this is going back to like the 40s. I think it started in the 40s and went into the 50s. I can't remember the exact year he died, but it may have even started in the 30s. He kind of became famous because he was first giving health advice. So people would send in letters, asking about an illness they had or symptoms they had. He would go into this trance and supposedly give a message on what the person could do to heal themselves. Now, since he didn't know what he was saying, there was somebody writing down what he said. And he had family members involved with this who supported him. And in fact, I think it was his brother who, I don't know if his brother is still alive, but one of his brothers was the head of the ARE for a while. I haven't checked to see who's in charge of it now. And so Edgar Casey became really very famous. People would send in questions with health concerns. But then he started to give messages that were spiritual. And the spiritual messages had to do with, a lot of them had to do with Jesus, reincarnation, Atlantis, the supposed lost civilization of Atlantis, Lemuria, another lost civilization. And the idea of Atlantis as being this lost civilization that was very, very advanced. They were like even more advanced than us. And this idea is very common in the New Age. Like many, many New Agers believe that there was this super enlightened, super advanced civilization called Atlantis. And the problem was they misused their powers, and so they were destroyed. And this is a very common idea in the New Age. I heard it all the time. I mean, people would even talk about it as though it was really true. They'd say, well, what happened in Atlantis, or if they had past life memories, they would remember a past life in Atlantis. I remember a life I had in Atlantis. So this idea that came mainly from Edgar Casey just really, had wings. It just flew all over the place. So when you come across things about Atlantis online that are New Agey, it's very likely that this all stems from Edgar Casey. Edgar Casey would talk about Jesus, but Jesus was a spiritual master. And he had lived different lives. And Edgar Casey believed he had lived at the time of Jesus and knew Jesus.
Wow.
So there was talk of Jesus, and this is something to recognize as far as psychics go, or anybody like this, is that often these people will talk about Jesus, and they'll say things about Jesus, or they may claim messages from Jesus, or that they knew Jesus, if they say they were in a past life. It's very interesting to me that these kind of activities, which are forbidden by God, and are actually evil activities, like to bring Jesus into the picture. I find that very interesting
Yeah.
because it's a real deception. It's another Jesus, to get people to believe in. And then if they start believing in the Jesus Edgar Casey talks about, and they really believe it, and it sounds real, and he's giving all this information,
Yeah.
that just leads them in the wrong direction.
Well, it's like, people are comfortable a lot of times with the view of Jesus that, he was loving and kind and warm, etc. And so, Mormons use him like that.
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims even use them like that. And so you even see it within the New Age, where they're using them like that as well.
Exactly. Yeah, he's always this kind, wise, spiritual master, never judged, and never criticized anybody. So this idea of Jesus became popular. He said that Jesus was a man, and that the Christ spirit descended on Jesus. And so the idea that there's a Christ spirit that will descend on somebody is also very common in the New Age. That's another, the views of Jesus in the New Age. There are a few different views, but that's one of them.
Right.
And in my article on my website, I explain how Edgar Casey came to the point where he would go into these trances. It was really something that happened to him. And he diagnosed his own problem. He was unable to speak, and he went into a trance. I can't remember now. I think somebody put him in the trance, and then he diagnosed his problem, and he was able to fix it. And then after that, there was somebody urging him to continue to do this. And at first, actually, he was resistant to the idea of talking about things like, he talked about astrology as well. And so at first he was resistant to this, but then he gave in to it, probably because of his Church of Christ background. I imagine he might have been initially resistant, but he eventually gave into it, and then just completely was, giving these spiritual things, advice to people. And by the way, as far as the healing, so-called healing goes, a lot of the advice he gave were basically folk remedies. So it's not like he was giving some kind of superior healing advice to people. But people really had confidence in it. And so, they would write and ask for his advice. So that's Edgar Casey. Now, he is probably one of the biggest examples in the 20th century of a well-known psychic channeler. So a psychic also can just be getting the information. It can come to them in different ways. It might just come to them in their mind, like they suddenly know something. They might see a picture in their mind, or they might hear something. So they're getting the information, it's coming into their mind. Now, this happened to me. I do want to mention, I took psychic development classes when I was learning astrology. Yeah. And my first teacher was a medium. She specialized in communication with the dead. And she was also a psychic. She was a psychic medium. A lot of psychics are also mediums, but not all mediums.
Can you explain the difference between the?
I probably should. Yeah, a psychic, would get information different ways. A medium claims to have communication with the dead. So, and that's also done in different ways, but they can claim that they can, hear what the dead person is saying, or they may have somebody, what they call on the other side, someone who is helping them get the information about the dead person, and then they relay it to the relative who's alive. So, but some people are psychic mediums, and they do both. They perform as a psychic, like if you go to them for advice, but they'll also be a medium if somebody comes to them and wants to know about, get a message from their dead husband or something. But not all psychics do that. That's sort of a specialized field, but a lot of them will just call themselves psychic mediums. And that's what this woman was, who was my teacher. And the next course I took, it was a male. He was just psychic. He was not a medium. He didn't do the medium stuff. He was psychic. He was very into these metaphysical ideas. He introduced us to the idea that each of the 12 disciples corresponded to an astrological sign. And this is another very common thing in the New Age. And this really fascinated me because of my interest in astrology. And this idea also you can find like in Unity, the Unity Church. So I was just inundated with all of these teachings from these psychics, and we were taught that we had spirit guides. These are disembodied beings who will aid you when you're on a spiritual path. And we did exercises in the class, like we would try to see auras around people. An aura is supposedly, it's different colors that you can see around a person. And these colors all mean something. So, she would have us look at somebody standing up there, and we were supposed to kind of let your eyes, you don't focus, you get in an unfocused gaze, and then you supposedly can see the auras. I mean, not everybody could, but some people said they did. We did other exercises, like one time we had to bring in an object that was either something maybe we had worn, like a piece of jewelry, or maybe something like it was a necklace that my mother had worn, or anything like an object that had belonged to somebody. And they put all of these objects in a big bowl and passed them around, and you had to pick an object out that wasn't yours. It couldn't be the one that you bought. And so you picked an object out, and then you had to, this is called psychometry. And this is another practice of being a psychic. So psychometry is holding an object and then reading the object. So you hold it and you supposedly get information about the person who owned it. So you sit there, and somebody might say, "Oh, I'm seeing a woman with long hair, and she had a lot of children, and she had an illness most of her life," or whatever. And so we did that, and then the person who brought the object would then say how correct, like, "Oh yeah, that's really close. That belonged to my aunt, and she had a lot of children, and she had heart disease or something." So then, then you're like, "Oh, wow, I was really doing it right." Now, what I think happens in these scenarios, of course, not everybody's right. And you may get some things right and other things wrong when you do things like this. What I think is happening is that you're getting information from fallen angels. So you're getting these spirit guides helping you with this information. Now, I had a lot of psychic experiences when I was doing my astrology readings, even when I wasn't doing them. But when I was doing an astrology reading, and an astrologer is not technically a psychic, but a lot of astrologers will have psychic experiences. And I believe that doing astrology will kind of initiate this psychic ability. It'll bring it on. And so a lot of times when I was doing a chart reading, I would see things in my head, or maybe I would see a word, and then I would tell the person what I was seeing, and then it would be true.
Wow.
So, I had, so these were psychic experiences. So I used to say, if people asked me if I was a psychic, which sometimes happened, I would say, "No, I'm not a psychic. I'm an astrologer, but I do have psychic abilities." So that was kind of how I saw myself. So that's what a psychic does. So they may get this information coming to them either, just in their head, and they feel they're tapping into it. They may believe their spirit guide is giving it to them, which is probably true. And that's kind of the main general way most psychics work. If you're going to see, don't go see a psychic, but when a person does go see a psychic, the psychic will often go into an altered state of consciousness before they do this, because they believe that you have to go to this other level of your mind in order to receive the information.
Wow.
And so that's what happens. And actually they give advice like that. If you're going to do psychic readings, that you should go into this other state of mind. And if you do it enough, you just go into it automatically. I mean, I believe I went into it when I was doing my astrology readings. Wow. But it was automatic. I didn't have to try to do it. Of course, I had been practicing, and I had been doing, if you do Eastern meditation, especially, then you'll do it really easily, because that's what Eastern meditation is. It's going into an altered state of consciousness.
You're almost feeling like you're leaving your body, or
not that extreme. You're aware of where you are, and I'm sitting in this room in this chair, and this person, is in front of me, and I'm talking to them. You're aware of everything, but it's kind of like you've tuned into another realm, is the best way I know how to put it. It's like you've kind of gone a step above this reality to another reality. And it just gives you a different feeling. But I don't know how to describe the feeling. I did notice when I finished doing a chart reading and the person had left, or I had left their place, that I would feel like I was coming down.
Wow.
Like I'm coming down back to reality, or just regular reality. So that was a very common experience for me. So psychics will get into this state, and a lot of psychics will just sit there and then tell you things about yourself or whatever, answer your questions or whatever. Then there are different ways you can get the information where you use specific items. So for example, you always see these cartoons of these women in turbans, and they're looking at a crystal ball.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very common, thing you see in our culture. Yeah. The crystal ball is really just a way to focus. It's a point of focusing that helps the psychic. And like some psychics, like I said, will just sit there and kind of get the information coming to them. Some like to have a point of focus, and that's what this crystal ball or opaque surface. And they will be looking at it, and it's not that there's anything really special about the crystal ball. It's not like magical or anything, but they will focus and be able to see things in it.
Wow.
Okay. Now I never did that, so I don't really know what that's like, but that's the idea behind it. So that's another way of being a psychic. Then you also, and I already mentioned psychometry, where you hold an object, and or you could look at a picture of somebody. I actually went to a psychic before I was taking these classes, but I was interested in all this stuff, and I went to a psychic who was kind of well known and had come to Atlanta to do some talks or something. And I arranged a meeting with him. I had to pay him, of course. And he asked me for pictures of my parents. He said, "Do you have any photos of your parents?" Now, I can't remember if I asked him a question about my parents or not. That I can't remember. But I remember him saying, "Do you have any pictures of your parents?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." So I gave him a photo of my mother and a photo of my father, and he looked at each one. I hear talking in the background. What is that?
Yeah, we got some people have coming in, and they forget to mute. So
okay.
I muted them. Sorry about that.
All right. So they looked at a picture of my father. He would look at it, and then he started telling me things about him. And he did the same with my mother. And I'm not going to repeat what he said because in each case, it was very strange and disturbing.
Wow.
It was very disturbing. And it was something that I would not have said those things about my parents. Okay. And it was bizarre.
So it wasn't something that you knew that was accurate that was being said.
Well, it's possible what he said was accurate, but it was something that I think it was something that in the case of my mother was probably not true. And in the case of my father might have been true, but was a very negative way of looking at my father's character.
Wow.
So it was kind of bizarre, and it stayed with me a long time. So, you have to, this is the thing about these psychics. People who go to these psychics, they think they're going to maybe get help. But a lot of times psychics will tell you very disturbing things. I had a friend, and this is when I was an astrologer, and I was married, and my husband and I had these friends. He worked with the husband. And so I already knew the wife. She had already been a friend. And so this husband and wife were not really deep into the new age. They were not into going to psychics or things like that. They were kind of like, she was a little bit interested. So she went to a psychic, I think to ask about her son. They had a very young son. He was like, 2 years old or something. And the psychic told her that when her son was older, like when he was going to be 8 or 9 or something, he was going to be molested. And this friend of mine was so disturbed. She told me about it. And she said, I'm so sorry I went, and I'm so worried, and I'm so upset. And now, of course, what's she going to do? She's going to obsess over this, right? Of course, these people were not Christians. And I didn't know what to say to her. I can't remember exactly what I said to her. I really don't know. I'm sure I tried to say something that, would make her feel better. Like, well, maybe, it could be wrong what she saw or something. I don't really remember what I told her, but I just remember her being traumatized. So, when you step across the line, and consult these people, you don't know what door you're opening. You just do not know what door you're opening. So anyway, so there's the crystal ball psychic, then the psychic that holds objects or looks at a photograph. Another way of kind of being a psychic, I would say, is using tarot cards. Now it's a combination there because you're reading these symbols of the tarot, which supposedly have these meanings, just like the planets have meaning to an astrologer. But a lot of psychics will use tarot cards as their main tool of focus. And so they may not even say they're a tarot card reader. They may just call themselves a psychic and then use tarot maybe sometimes, maybe not all the time. Or they may use different things. They may not just use a tarot card. They may use psychometry or whatever. So that's another way to focus your attention, supposedly, when you're doing this, what they call a reading. It's called a reading. So those are probably the most common things. Now, you also can get things like the I Ching. I had a good friend who was really big into the I Ching. Now, the I Ching comes from China, and it comes specifically really from the religion of Taoism. And it's these hexagrams in patterns, and there's all these different patterns. And you have these little, it can be on cards, like playing cards, or it can be on little square tiles, and the hexagrams are etched on them. And you pick some or put them down. I mean, I never did it, but you put them down and then you read them, kind of like the tarot cards, except you're reading these hexagrams that supposedly, they go way back. I don't know if anybody knows when the I Ching was started, but I think it goes pretty far back. And this friend of mine considered herself a psychic, but she used the I Ching when she did her readings. That was her thing. For her, that was the best tool. So that's what she did. She was a very interesting person too. Anyway, so those are some of the methods. Now, if you do channeling, that is a type of psychic activity. It's not as common as just the things I just described, because channeling is when you open yourself up for a message to come through you. Now, so normally this is one way to do this is that you actually allow whatever you think it is to speak through you and use your voice, use your vocal cords. So you're really having to give yourself over completely to this spirit. And often when people who do this, they'll have another voice, their voice will change.
Whoa.
And now a lot of people, I know a lot of Christians think people who do this are just faking. And I do believe there are people who fake it, but I do believe there are people who are actually doing it. Okay, just because of what I was in for so long and what I saw, there's nothing to stop somebody from letting a spirit speak through them if that's what they want. This is, this is something that fallen angels are more than happy to do. And they'll come through and give all this information. And there's really two things going on here. Like psychic, who's a channeling information, normally is not doing it in a personal way. It's normally not going to be, they're going to tell you about you or your relationship or, maybe what job you should look for or something like that. Channeling usually has some kind of spiritual message to it. So the people who channel tend to be people that will have maybe followers who come to listen to them. And often they will be giving spiritual teachings, and maybe one of the more well-known people is J.Z. Knight, who lives on this big ranch in, I think it's Wyoming or it's Washington. No, actually, I think it's the state of Washington. I get her mixed up with another person that's out in that area. I'm on the East Coast, so forgive me, you guys who are out in that area know it better than I do. But J.Z. Knight, I think it's Washington, and the other person was like in Wyoming or something, and she's dead. That was Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She was actually the leader of a cult, a New Age cult, and she had followers, and she was out there in one of those states like Wyoming and everything. And she actually amassed a lot of weapons. Wow. And, got the attention of the government. But she's another story. That's not who I'm talking about. So J.Z. Knight has this big ranch or whatever in Washington. She claimed to channel the teachings or this entity called Ramtha, who is supposedly a 35,000-year-old warrior.
Wow.
And she attracted a lot of people. I mean, people actually, and I think maybe they're still there, they go live at the ranch where she is. And so she was very well known when I was in the New Age. I was hearing about her. And she actually is behind a movie. I don't know, Devin, did you ever hear of the movie, What the Bleep Do We Know?
No.
Okay. I can't remember when it came out. I went to see it. I think it actually came out in the 90s after I became a Christian. I went to see it. It's a movie that the basic idea of it is that everything is energy. And when you see that everything is energy, you realize you can manipulate reality. And that actress, who's that deaf actress who is kind of famous, Marlee Maitland, I think is her name or something like that. She's a fairly well-known actress. She's a deaf actress, and she's been in quite a few movies. She's in that movie. She stars in that movie. And so the whole movie is this idea about energy. It's very New Agey. I mean, if you want to see what the New Age is really about, see that movie. And you probably can find it somewhere. I haven't looked for it lately, but who knows? It might even be on YouTube. What the Bleep Do We Know? It was funded by J.Z. Knight. And some of the people associated with it are some of the people that are associated with that, the book and video, The Secret, that Oprah promoted.
Right, right.
Some of the same people are associated with the film What the Bleep Do We Know? And so What the Bleep Do We Know wasn't like a big mainstream hit, but it was like a cult hit. It was a hit with a lot of people, kind of an underground hit. And it spread the idea that quantum physics supports these views that we're all energy and we're all connected and we can manipulate reality. Of course, that is not true. But this is very common in the New Age, that quantum physics.
That's kind of like a Deepak Chopra
Yes.
view, right? Is that right?
Yes, it is. Deepak Chopra is big on that. And actually goes back to a man, it may go back further than this, but I read a book by Fritjof Capra, who is actually a physicist. And he wrote a book called The Tao of Physics that came out around 1977.
Okay.
And I read that book. I was very impacted by it. This was a few years before I started taking the psychic development and the astrology classes. But I was very impacted by it, and it really affected my worldview. And he goes into detail in this book, and he talks about physics, and he's a physicist, so you think, well, he must know what he's talking about. But he was actually later, I found out he was criticized very heavily by other physicists. So I don't think that what he was saying actually is supported by science. I think he took it and wanted it to support his beliefs. And so he talks a lot about Eastern religions, and that's why it's called the Tao of Physics. He talks about Taoism, which I was into. So anyway, he had that idea. And then later there was the Dancing Woolly Masters by Gary Zukav, and that was the same idea. And Deepak Chopra also promoted that idea. That's what the bleep do we know is kind of that idea. And it's a very big idea in the New Age. So anyway, so you have this channeler, Jay-Z Knight. I kind of got off there into another realm, but it's all connected. And she's a famous. There's another guy who was channeling somebody named Benjamin, and he was teaching in the Southwest. Then there has been a lot of channeled books. Okay, this is a real big one where books are channeled, supposedly. Of course, one of the biggest and most well-known is A Course in Miracles. And that actually started with a woman named Helen Schuckman, who at the time was an atheist psychiatrist living in New York City. If you want to pick a secular person in a secular city, you can't get more secular than an atheist psychiatrist in New York City. I think that's sort of the epitome of secular culture. And she kept hearing this voice that said, this is A Course in Miracles, take it down, or take these words down. And it kept repeating in her head, and she was worried about her mental health. And she actually told a few psychiatrist friends about it, like, I don't know what's going on. What is this? And finally, someone said, well, why don't you just do it? Just write down, say, okay, and start writing things down. And so that's what she did. And it ends up with A Course in Miracles, which is a book that is supposedly channeling Jesus. Yeah. So Jesus is talking. Have you never heard of A Course in Miracles?
I have not.
Really, it's promoted by Oprah and one of Oprah's friends, Marianne Williamson.
I've heard of her.
You've heard of her, yeah. Well, her first book, A Return to Love, is based on A Course in Miracles. It's based on the teachings of A Course in Miracles. And so, and it was very big in the New Age. A Course in Miracles, like every other person I knew did the course. They just called it the course. And, people would ask me, Marcia, are you doing the course? And I'd be like, no, because I wasn't interested in it. Because it talked about Jesus, and to me, it sounded like Christianity, and I wasn't interested in it. So I didn't want anything to do with it. But yeah, so so the supposed Jesus is talking about God and the Holy Spirit, and it says things like, of course, there's no sin, there's no such thing as sin, and you've always been connected to God, and God is in you, and everybody's connected, and it's the basic New Age worldview given in this book. So that's a channeled book. there are other channel books that became popular just in secular culture, not necessarily the New Age, but I mean, they just were out there, published by secular publishers. And one of them was called the Seth Material. And there was a woman named Jane Roberts, and she was using the Ouija board. And one night when she was using the Ouija board, whoever was communicating with her said, I'm going to start communicating with you, but you aren't going to need the Ouija board for that. And so what happened is that she would, a lot like Edgar Casey, she would lie down and kind of go into this trance. And this entity that called itself Seth would speak through her, and her husband recorded what she would say and would also ask questions. Her husband would have questions prepared ahead of time for the session. It became a regular thing that they did. And she would, her husband would ask questions, maybe like, why are there so many religions? Or, what is the main problem with humanity today? Or what, just whatever. And then Seth would give these answers. And
different voice or same?
Yes, not only her voice, but her husband took photographs of her face when Seth was talking, and her face is all distorted. Like it's like really distorted looking. It's really strange.
He didn't think there's anything wrong. He thinks
they thought this was wonderful. They were getting information. And I mean, I did too. I mean, I can't criticize anybody because I was reading the Seth books. I read the first one was called Seth Speaks. And it had photos of her with her face distorted when Seth was talking, like she would be like, her face was like this, and her mouth was all crooked and everything. And of course her eyes were closed because she would not remember when she woke up. She didn't remember anything she said or that Seth said. She had no memory, just like Edgar Casey. Huh?
So then you're saying that there are scammers out there, but you're saying this wasn't necessarily a scam.
I don't know. Having read the books, I don't think so. No, the material in the books is such that it's this very kind of deeply philosophical, metaphysical spirituality that is, I don't think Jane Roberts was able to formulate herself. I don't think she had the capacity for that. And she was a writer, but she wasn't, I just don't think she would be able to say the things that was said in this book. And another book, especially that's really heavy duty, called another Seth book, The Nature of Personal Reality, it's called.
Okay.
And Seth actually gives advice for a certain meditation to do in one of the books, and I followed his advice.
Wow.
I did.
Can I ask you a question real quick? Was there ever a time when they released the audio of the questions or anything like that?
I don't know. I recently, maybe not recently, maybe a little over a year ago, I decided to look back into Jane Roberts. I discovered that the house where she would have these sessions, she used to have people come sit there and she would, go into the state and give messages too. So that was done also with these people who were followers of Seth. And the house is there, and it was bought by some people who are followers, and it's sort of like a landmark now. It's somewhere in upper New York State. I can't remember exactly where. And I went to a website, and there's still very active followers of Jane Roberts and of the Seth teachings. It's called the Seth Material. So several books came from those sessions. And there are people who are just really, this is kind of like their religion. It's their religion.
Right.
Just like people who the Course in Miracles is like their religion.
Yeah.
And so this is channeling, and I do believe it's true channeling. I do believe there was this entity, of course, was a fallen angel, because the way that I recognize things as true channeled writings, to me, is that they're very spiritual sounding, and they are actually very complex ideas, and they're diabolically clever. They're diabolically clever.
Wow.
And if they always undermine the true Jesus Christ and God's word. In some way, there will be an attack on that.
I got it. Right. As
Yeah.
to where if it wasn't necessarily a real counterfeit, it wouldn't really, I guess, matter or focus to go make sure to undermine the gospel, right? But if there's a concerted effort to undermine the gospel, then probably a good chance that it is a real spiritual false,
Oh, well,
fallen angel.
these channel things they always attack Christianity one way or the other.
Yeah,
There's
so if it was
there's
talking about something that had nothing to do with Christianity or the gospel, then maybe you could say, well, maybe they're just putting on. But when it's always going after the gospel, then you see an intention there.
Yes, right, exactly. And you see that too with, for example, we have a little more current example than, oh, by the way, Jane Roberts died in 1986. And I could not find out how she died. And I think I sent a message to this website and asked how she died, because I remember reading about her death and they didn't say anything. And this person told me, I think I finally found out. And of course, now I can't remember. She had some kind of illness. I just don't remember now what it was. She had a health issue because she died relatively young. And of course, I think if you're channeling some entity like this, which is a fallen angel, I think it will damage your health over time. So I think what she was doing did not help her health. I think it probably aggravated her physical condition, because physically it does take a toll on the person. And even the people who channel will admit this. They will admit it. So another example is Conversations with God. This was a series of books written by Neale Donald Walsch. The first one, I think, came out in 2000. So it's 20 years ago, but it's closer than Jane Roberts and the Seth Material, which were more in the 80s, 70s and 80s. And I read Conversations with God, book one, and I have an article. I have two articles on it on my website. Well, I have an article on that, and I have another article. He wrote a book called, I think it's Communion with God. And then he wrote a book, Conversations with God for Teenagers. So I have articles on that. Now, these are channeled. What happened, what he claimed happened was he went through a personal crisis, and he was in sort of a desperate state, and he was mad at God. And so he said, I'm just going to write out, why I'm mad. And he was writing out why he was mad. And he was asking questions like, why did you let this happen, God? Why did you let my marriage end? Why? And supposedly his hand, the pencil in his hand started moving, and the answers started coming. Now, this is automatic writing. This is another form of channeling. So basically, automatic writing is a form of psychic channeling. So it falls under the psychic and channeling umbrella. And this is where, instead of letting the entity speak through you, like Jane Roberts and Edgar Casey, the entity is writing through your hand. And so he was getting answers supposedly from God. And these books are also very diabolically clever. And God quotes a lot of scripture too, but out of context, of course. And anyway, I have articles on my website. If you look under book evaluations, look under Neale Donald Walsch, and you'll find my articles on there. Because what this God says is just horrible. I mean, he says there's no such thing as right or wrong. One of the first thing he says early on in the material is words are merely noise and only have the meaning that are given to them. So they're really just noise. So I wrote in the margin of the book, I said, then why should we believe this book? I mean, because the book, what is the book? It's a bunch of, all it is words. And he just said words are just noise. So I was like, well, why should we even read the book? It's like, I mean, to me, it's so self-refuting. And
Right.
Neil Donald Walsh didn't catch that at all, you know. But his books became so popular. I remember the Washington Post had a cover story on it. And it was about how people were meeting in homes and using his books for their spiritual study. So that went on for a long time, and he still has, there's still followers of these books. There's still people who, because I still hear from them from time to time, not as much as I used to, but I do still hear from them. So they're still out there. So there's an automatic writing thing. And again, you can see there's attack on the true God, attack on Jesus, attack on the Bible. It's very, very typical to find in all of these things. So those are all kind of examples. And there's another whole big area that I don't really get into because I'm not that interested in the whole UFO area. I sort of see it as a subculture of the New Age. And there are a lot of magazines that supposedly have these channeled messages from these aliens. You know, people who are really into this, to me, they're sort of living in another world. This is not an area, even as a New Ager, that I was into. I had a housemate who was really into it. He would listen to messages from the Space Brothers, and the Space Brothers were very popular, and they were supposedly giving messages to humanity about what was going to happen. And it was always these bad things were going to happen. And my housemate would tell me, and he was very sincere. He was a really nice guy, you know, and he would say, Marcia, okay, I just listened to the Space Brothers tape, and the place to go now is the mountains of Colorado. And then the next time it might be Canada or something, you know, like before all these disasters happen. So there's a lot of channel material, I think, in the UFO subculture.
Okay.
But you can just find it really in the New Age. It's pretty common. It's not an uncommon thing.
For those interested, reasons to believe. I think it's Ken Samples and Hugh Ross and them wrote a book, Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. But they go through a lot of the issues, and I think they say pretty much most of it can be explained, but they do say there is an element where they do think that it is demonic and demons that are involved, and kind of like with what you're saying.
I totally agree with that. And I forgot about that book. I'm glad you mentioned it. I mean, I haven't read it, but I know about it. And another author who dealt with the UFO subculture, another Christian author, is Bill Alnor.
Okay.
Alnor, who he died several years ago. His wife actually is a Facebook friend of mine. And so Bill Alnor, if you look up his name on Amazon, a lot of his books will come up, and he wrote about some of these UFO cults, including he wrote about that one that became famous, the Heaven's Gate cult, where they all killed themselves. Remember that? That happened like 98, 99 or something like that, I think. Wow. And you've heard of it, right?
I've heard of it, but I couldn't remember the details on it. I've heard of the Heavens.
Yeah, it was this man named Marshall Applewhite, and he had a woman who was like his, you know, I don't know if she was his lover, just his companion, but they kind of led the cult. And I think he called her Bo Peep or something like that. And he would give these messages, and he amassed this following of quite a variety of people. I mean, accountants, school teachers, you know, mechanics. It was just a real variety of people that you would not think would go for this kind of thing. And they were, you know, they would go around and hear him talk. He would talk in different places. And then he finally went to California. I think it was in California where he had that little headquarters. And then the teaching became, this comet was coming. Okay, the Hale-Bopp comet. Right. And that was going to have the spaceship on it where they could be taken away, but they had to kill them. They had to leave their body, which he called a vehicle, and they had to leave their vehicle in order to get to the spaceship. And they killed themselves. And I remember seeing interviews on TV like a year later. They had a couple of people who had been in the cult, but had left it and had not, of course, killed themselves. And they actually regretted not killing themselves. They said they were sorry. Yeah, they were sorry they missed that, or they would have gotten on the spaceship.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
and folks, I mean, it really shows you just the the dangers of of this, and just how brainwashed a person can get. We've got about 5 minutes, Marcia. So
okay.
kind of tell us what some of the main points of this particular issue that we can take away. What would you say?
Okay. Well, I would say that we can't assume these things are just scams.
Right.
Yes, there are people who do this, and they're basically just con artists. And they're good at reading people. So they'll say things about you that are probably true because they're good at sizing you up, saying some things that are true about you. But we can't assume that's true. We have to assume there's a spiritual element to this kind of thing. And not only avoid going, of course, consulting any of these people, which would be forbidden. I mean, I would see Deuteronomy 18, 10, and 11 covering this, because to me, this would be covered by spirit contact, because that's actually what psychics are doing, whether they think they're doing it or not. They are getting some kind of information from fallen angels. They don't actually have psychic abilities, okay? That they don't actually have that. So there's a spiritual element there that is not from God, and it's dangerous. So going to these people opens the door. Reading the material opens the door. I don't believe in doing that unless you're doing research in this area for some reason. It's better just not to, you don't want that stuff in your head, because once it's in your head, you can't ever get it out.
Right.
And so I think that the main thing is to be aware of these people are out there, and they're more out there than you think, because a lot of these new age books are channeled, etc. And of course, if you run into people who believe these things, or they're following one of these people, then you can try to have a conversation with them about Christ. Try to ask them about God. Who do you think God is? Or who do you think Jesus? It's very likely the person will believe in God,
Right.
So you want to try to talk about, well, who is God? Describe God. How do you know this is God?
Right.
Or if they believe in Jesus, you can talk about Jesus. And I mean, I always try to find a way in by asking them a question, and asking them, or what are your spiritual beliefs, or do you have any particular beliefs, or are you still kind of searching, or what kind of books are you reading, or whatever. It depends a lot on the circumstance and your relationship with them. But
Right.
I think unless they just don't want to dialogue at all, I think it's good to just start up a dialogue and see if you can end up. I mean, you just never know, because sometimes these people are really spiritually hungry.
Yeah.
And they're searching for answers, and God could use that conversation, to lead them to the truth.
Marcia, we've got a gentleman here who asked if he could ask a question. So we got about 2 minutes. So
Okay.
Carrie, I'm going to ask you to unmute and feel free to ask your question. Like I say, we've got about 2 minutes, so go right ahead, Carrie, if you're there.
Oh, I don't think it was me.
No.
Oh,
It was someone else.
Yes, Robert Worley.
Robert. Robert.
Hi. I just ran into your feed this morning, and I kind of went back and forth with you on an item.
Yeah.
I have gotten into witnessing to UFO cults in the past, and I've actually been invited to their inner meeting at about 2000. They were trying to convert Christians to get some type of fundamentalist Christian. So I got involved in going and witnessing to them. But I got a question. If you could just tell your audience or have a comment on Madame Helen Blavatsky and her influences, and I'll let you. I'll mute and let you answer.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Yeah, he's asking about Helen Blavatsky, who was a Russian and the founder of the Theosophical Society. She actually she kind of did it with another man, a colonel whose name escapes me now. Olcott, I think was his name. And they started the Theosophical Society around 1880 something. And this was based on what she said. This is her claim now, okay? She claimed she had amassed these teachings by traveling in the East, like to Tibet, in India. And she had amassed all of these teachings. Plus, she claimed to be in contact with what she called these Tibetan masters and spiritual masters, and that she could receive messages from them. And so she got a following around her with these kind of claims and with the supposed messages from these masters. And a lot of this involved, it was a mixture of the worldview was a mixture of Eastern religious worldview, along with what we would just call a New Age worldview and an occult worldview, because they were in contact with these masters, who of course were spirits, and psychic abilities. It was really a melange of a lot of things. But the Theosophical Society, which actually still exists, the Theosophical Society still exists, went over for a period of years and still has followers. I knew people who were going to Theosophical meetings when I was in Atlanta. And they have a big building, a publishing house called the Lucis Trust, LUCIS, which actually used to be called Lucifer, because they are Luciferians. And that's another realm. I did talk about Satanism, and I never mentioned Luciferianism, and I should have, but let me just say this, it's different from Satanism. Luciferianism is a belief that Lucifer, they don't call him Satan, they call him Lucifer, was truly an angel of light and was trying to give wisdom to mankind. And so they see him as a good figure. So anyway, they're Luciferians, and some of the followers, the first New Age spokespeople were followers of Theosophy. And so some of the beginnings of the New Age movement are rooted in the Theosophical Society. That's probably all I have time to say, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, guys. Great show, Marcia. Hate
Thank you.
run out of time here. Join us next week, folks. We'll have Shannon Guthrie on. If you go to our YouTube page, Ratio Christi at Winthrop, that's RATIO CHRISTI, Winthrop. You can find our YouTube page. You'll find all of Marcia's talks on there, as well as numerous other. I think we've got over 100 videos. Our whole focus is apologetics, especially on the college campus. So feel free to follow us there. Next week we'll be on. If you go to Theology Matters with the Pellews, PELLEWS, on Facebook, you'll get our updates for our shows there as well. So thank you guys, everybody, for tuning in. Marcia, always looking forward. We're talking about having you on next month and doing a series on the Enneagram. We got
I look forward to that. Hey,
Yeah.
I just figured out how to see the chat. I just figured it out.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's the book.
So,
There's the book.
I'm hoping you and Melissa can just cover the different chapters, maybe go 4 to 6 weeks or something. So that'll be a good series as well. So Marcia, thank you again. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. God bless.
Okay. Thanks, Devin.
Thank you.